Hi, and welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. This is Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and I would love for you to leave me a review of this podcast and also to share and like it and share it with your friends, see what they think, and let me know. I would love to shout you out on social media. And also, I would love for you to follow me on Instagram at Dr. Sadaf OBGYN, as well as TikTok. I also have started a YouTube channel at Dr. Sadaf Intimacy Coach. I'd love for you to follow me on all of those channels. And most importantly, I'd love for you to become a patient. I am now accepting telehealth patients for sexual health as well as menopause health in New York and Michigan. So if you are a woman that is looking for a doctor that understands you and can actually take the time to listen to all of your concerns, reach out to me. Reach out at Dr. Sadaf at drsadaf.com. And I would love to see you as a patient. And now for the episode. I'm an American board certified OBGYN, a mom, a Muslim, and I'm talking about sex. This is the Muslim Sex Podcast. Welcome to the Muslim Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sadaf Lodhi, and this episode is everything you need to know about thyroid and stress and how that can affect intimacy and your love life. But before I get into it, the one thing I want to make very clear is that I am not giving any type of medical advice. So if you have any questions about your health, please speak with your friendly neighborhood health provider. And if you have any questions about your religion, please speak with your religious leader. And this is the Muslim Sex Podcast because I just happen to be a Muslim woman that talks about sex. So I am super excited to have on with me today Dr. Dana Gibbs. Dr. Gibbs comes to us from
Texas.
Oh,
Texas, yeah.
right. That's right. Texas. So I will let Dr. Gibbs introduce herself.
Sure. Hi, I'm happy to be here. I am Dana Gibbs. I'm an otolaryngologist. I know that's a weird place to come from, but I've been in private practice for about 24 years in the North Texas area and just retired from my full-time ENT practice. And I now have a boutique practice managing thyroid and hormones
Nice.
for stressed out patients.
That is awesome. Awesome. So tell us more about that. How'd you get into thyroid and dealing with stress hormones, especially since you are an ENT? I guess you see the thyroid all the
Yeah.
time. You work with the thyroid, but tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where it started. It started because one, I'm an ENT and I work with thyroid all the time. Um, but it also really started with my personal story. So I was a stressed out kid, a stressed out teenager. Um, and I almost gave up my dream of being a doctor, which I'd had since I was like, what, 8 years old? I don't know, because I got so tired. I got so tired when I was in high school and then in college. And I did end up going ahead and applying to med school because I couldn't think of anything else I really wanted to do. But I stayed tired and I really, really struggled with energy all through that time period. And I also just struggled with depression and irregular periods and getting sick a lot. Like every time I would have a little break, I would get sick. And I just thought that was normal, or maybe I was just lazy. I didn't know. And it really wasn't until, um, boy, 3 or 4 years after I was out and I was an attending that I went to an allergy conference of all things. And there was somebody there talking about hormones and thyroid. And I was sitting in this lecture and my mouth fell open because every symptom they were talking about was me. I was cold all the time. I would be faint and low blood sugar. I would pass out frequently. I was exhausted. My body temperature was low. I needed to sleep so much more than everybody else. My periods were still irregular. And I just, I just got sick a lot. I've been tested for allergies. They said, no, you don't have that. They checked my TSH, they checked my thyroid hormones. They said, no, everything's fine, you're good. But then I went to this conference, and the guy started talking about some people's TSH doesn't get abnormal, and I'm like, what? Oh my gosh. And so I tried the treatment he suggested, and it worked for me. It was like a miracle. It was like, oh my gosh, this is what normal people feel like. Um, but I wasn't satisfied with his explanation of, well, we just don't know how to do it. You just have to check your body temperature, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, that there's got to be a scientific explanation for that. And so I started looking, and I finally found an integrative medicine specialist, and he was an ENT too, which was very interesting, who explained to me what was going on and how to measure it with labs, and how to adjust it to where it wasn't too much or too little, because there's a lot of problems with, if you get too much thyroid hormone, you feel bad. If you get not enough, you feel bad. If the balance is wrong, you feel bad. But anyway, so that's where it started. It started with that. But then it turns out there was a lot more to it. And it wasn't just thyroid. It was like, okay, where did the stress come in? Where did the stress come in to trigger the thyroid problems, if that's where they were triggered? Where did the stress come in to trigger the menstrual irregularities, which I didn't, I just thought, oh, I just have that. I didn't realize there was a trigger for it. Well, there's a trigger for it. Um, I didn't I didn't realize any of that. But the more I interacted with this person, and he styles himself as just an integrative family doctor now, even though he was an ENT surgeon for a long, long time, and then an allergist. But there's just so much to it. And it turns out that the whole endocrine system is kind of balled up in this, of which your sex hormones are a big part of that. Your stress hormones are a big part of that. So that's kind of where I started getting interested in it. And then as I headed into menopause, which has been a few years now, I'm 58, no, 57, sorry. My memory is bad too. That's another one of those symptoms. Um, as I started heading into menopause and having those symptoms, it was like, okay, how am I going to manage this? And he was actually the one that I turned to for the knowledge, since he had explained all this other stuff to me. So
Wow.
that's where it came from.
Yeah. So, can you, sir, for the listeners and the viewers out there that may not understand what you mean when you talk about sex hormones and the stress hormones and this and that, what exactly are you referring to, and where do they come from in the brain?
Okay, well, so you were right. They come from the brain. So your brain signals to a part of your brain stem called the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland puts out a whole bunch of releasing hormones, or neurotropic hormones, that go to your ovaries, that go to your thyroid, that go to your adrenal glands, which are the stress hormone glands,
Mhm.
and tell them what to do.
Sure.
And all of that stuff is very complex, and it feeds back on itself. So if one of them gets too high, it can turn around and lower the other ones, which is what happens with stress. And stress is really interesting because your body can't tell the difference, or your brain can't tell the difference from the kind of stress that's like war, famine, slavery, those kind of things. It thinks those are the same as, I'm worried I might have cancer, or my husband and I have a fight every week, or I'm worried about money, or I'm on a diet and I'm really restricting my calories. Your body sees those, and getting sick, like having cancer, having pneumonia, having
Mhm.
any sort of chronic illness or chronic pain. All of those things, your body reacts exactly the same to all of those things.
Sure.
And what happens is that your stress hormones go up, and there are 3 stress hormones that we talk about. One of them is adrenaline,
Mhm.
which everybody kind of knows what
Sure.
adrenaline is.
Yeah.
That's that you nearly get in a car wreck on the freeway, and your heart starts pounding and your body flushes and the time slows down, all that. That's adrenaline. But then the other one that is big and important is something called cortisol, and
Yeah.
your adrenal glands make cortisol. And if they make too much of it all the time, it turns around and feeds back on all the other hormones. And so it can mess your thyroid up in ways that are very subtle and are not found on the standard normal thyroid test that most doctors know to do. It can also feed back on your um, estrogen and your sex hormones to knock those down. So, for example, everybody's heard about star athletes who don't have periods anymore. And it's kind of an overtraining syndrome, but it's just that your body recognizes that as stress and it pumps up your cortisol and knocks down everything else. One of the things that it knocks down is your thyroid. Guess what? And it doesn't necessarily knock down the TSH or let the TSH rise. It can actually knock down the thyroid function without messing up the TSH. And so it looks like everything is fine when that's what's checked, but it might not be. And if you have those symptoms that I described, then that's something that needs a deeper look from your doctor. And there's more hormones to check than just the free T4 and the TSH, which are the standard ones.
Sure, sure. So just for people that don't know what TSH is, TSH means thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's typically the
Correct.
hormone that we check as physicians when you go in and you're worried about your thyroid. We usually check like a TSH and a T4, that's a free T4, and
Hmm.
to usually check the thyroid function. But as Dr. Gibbs is saying, that sometimes it can come back normal and you can still have those symptoms, and then you can be what we call subclinical hypothyroid. So even though the lab function is not showing that you have low thyroid, but you're experiencing the symptoms, you may actually have it. And so you may benefit from some thyroid.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the thyroid that you generally might benefit from might not be the normal levothyroxine or synthroid or any of the other brands that are that same hormone. It might be that you need a combination of that plus the other thyroid hormone, which is the T3. And it gets quite complicated, and I don't necessarily think we have time to go into that. But just to know that those things can be off with your TSH looking completely normal is enough ammunition that it's like, well, I should check into it and find a doctor who knows how to prescribe T3 and believes in it,
Sure.
and go get fixed. Um,
Yeah.
so that's how that
I
works.
think that, I think that's very important. And for people that are, listening or watching this online, I think it's really important to be able to advocate for yourself. And so if you have those symptoms that Dr. Gibbs spoke about, like you're feeling tired all the time, maybe your hair is falling out, you feel cold all the time, you're gaining weight, you're depressed, you're not sure what's going on, you're missing part of your eyebrow. Um,
Yeah, this outside corner of your eyebrow, if that hair has thinned and fallen out, then that's a really strong sign that there's something wrong with your thyroid. And then ridges on your fingernails is another one. And then grooves on the sides of your tongue where your teeth make an imprint. Those are three things that you can look for on your body and go, oh, okay, those are specifically off when thyroid is messed up.
Interesting. Tell me a little bit about this ridges on your fingernails.
So, boy, I still have them actually. They never completely went away. Your thyroid gland is like the thermostat on your body, and it makes all of your cells function better. It drives your metabolism. And one of the things that it drives is the growth of your hair and the growth of your fingernails. And so if they get um, thin and brittle and they get ridges running down them, then that means they're not being stimulated properly, and they'll look they'll look like they have ridges.
Wow. That's really interesting. Very important information. So then,
Yeah.
if somebody thinks they have something like that, would they go to their endocrinologist or would they go to an integrative medicine doc? Who would they go see for that?
So some endocrinologists are now starting to pay more attention to the T3 and then the reverse T3, which is the blocker of T3. But more integrative doctors right now are really integrative, and functional medicine doctors really are knowing more about these kind of newer and in innovative ways to think about thyroid.
Sure,
So that's who I would recommend that people look for,
sure.
somebody who does integrative medicine.
Sure. So talk to me a little bit more about the chronic stress. I think most people have stress and some people have chronic
Yeah.
stress. And, you did mention a little bit about cortisol and which is a hormone that's released from the adrenal glands. How does
Hmm.
that exactly impact, what does stress do to that?
Oh boy. Well, okay. So high cortisol um, is something that happens when you're chronically stressed. I mean, your body needs cortisol to live. You have to have cortisol. It's not a bad, I don't want to make the wrong impression that cortisol is bad. You have to have it. If you don't, you can't live. But when you have chronic stress in your life, it can create some changes when cortisol is elevated. So cortisol um, is, so if thyroid is the the engine of the car, then the cortisol is the gas pedal, and it pushes to gear you up to handle a chronic illness or to handle um, basically some marathon where you run away from where you live to somewhere else. I mean, it's a very, very primitive thing, but so cortisol drives your insulin levels. Everybody's heard of insulin. Insulin is what um, burns your blood sugar, and cortisol drives you to be more insulin resistant, meaning it takes more insulin to push the sugar in your blood into your cells. And if you stay with high insulin levels, even if your blood sugar levels don't look abnormal, then you're going to gain weight, and you're also going to have some follow-on effects like depression, anxiety, and more fatigue. There's more heart disease. There's more um, likelihood of developing cancers. There's all kinds of negative things that happen in your body when your insulin levels are prolonged. The other thing that chronic elevated cortisol does is it feeds back on your brain, and it pushes down your thyroid. And
Mm,
you could kind of think about this in the okay, so say you're in a famine, and we're not in a famine, of course, but we do go on diets all the time, so it's your body doesn't know the difference. Say you're in a famine, or you're highly dieting, and your cortisol goes up, your adrenaline goes up, and the signal that your body gets is, we're under attack, we have to conserve energy. So it knocks down your thyroid. So guess what happens? Then your metabolism slows down, and so that when you go back to eating the normal amount of calories, your metabolism is slower than it was before, and then you gain more weight. And then all those other things that we said about low thyroid, those also happen. So those are kind of crummy. Um, but you know, high cortisol, low thyroid also can be responsible for mood changes, which can make you feel hopeless and despondent and clinically depressed, which, boy, I'll tell you what, that's kind of one of the last things that I'm thinking about when I'm depressed is my sexual function. Um, the other thing that it does is it feeds back downward on those sex hormones in your brain, which are the ones that drive your ovaries to have normal periods and um, to feel those desires and inclinations to want to um, have relations with your spouse. So there's just so much to it. Um, that's there. And that chronic stress, it's like I said, you can be just as worried. I mean, you can have just as much stress from worrying about a bad outcome as you can from actually having the bad outcome, which is, unique to human beings. No other species can make themselves stressed out just by worrying about things.
Yeah.
Um,
I think what you mentioned is a really good point about the chronic stress and how that affects really everything in your body, right? So, what
yeah,
I find interesting is that you mentioned that the chronic stress can actually lead to feeling anxiety and depressed, and that makes sense. And it also affects your thyroid, right? So, I guess all that negative feedback that the cortisol does, it affects more than just the ACTH in the brain. It'll also affect the
right.
thyroid and the other hormones coming from the pituitary, right?
Yes,
From
exactly.
because they're all being affected via the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus affects the pituitary,
Exactly.
which then affects the organs that release those hormones. And so you're
Yeah.
getting that negative feedback.
Right. And it's a conservation mechanism. It's like, okay, your body says, okay, we're under attack. So we have to raise the hormones that are essential for life.
Sure.
But the problem with that is that it competes with those other two. It competes with the thyroid. It competes with the reproductive hormones. And so they get downregulated. They get backseat. Um, and when that's been going on for long enough, when it's been going on for a really long time, your thyroid can actually kind of get. I mean, this we hear this terminology bandied about adrenal fatigue,
Mm,
and
yes.
doctors are like, "Oh, adrenal fatigue doesn't exist. That's fake, whatever." But truthfully, your adrenals can run out of raw materials to make enough of those hormones and begin really aggressively conserving. Um, and the first ones to get knocked off are the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. The next one that gets knocked off is something called aldosterone. And, when I think back to my personal history, I think I had that because aldosterone is the hormone in your body that makes you retain water and salt in your bloodstream. So it keeps your blood pressure up. Well, I had pretty low blood pressure. I've always had pretty low blood pressure. But when I was in med school, I started fainting. My blood pressure would get so low, I would stand up. It would be early in the morning on rounds. I would just either have to sit down on the floor in the hallway or faint.
Oh gosh.
And, of course I got ridiculed for it, which made my stress even worse. So it's
That's
kind of a
awful.
mess. But
Yeah.
but yeah, so just this idea that your adrenals steal from the other hormones because they all come from the same raw materials.
Right.
And that you can replenish those raw materials. There's two supplements that I recommend, and one of them is kind of like the nuts and bolts that are used to put those hormones together, and that's something called um, bovine adrenal cortex, and it's something that's available as a supplement over the counter. When you take it, you want to take it in the same rhythm that your body would use to make cortisol. So you don't want to take it middle of the day, dinner time, because that's when cortisol naturally goes down. I'm making a wave with my hand. Cortisol rises during the night and is actually at the very peak at about 6 a.m. when you first wake up in the morning. And it stays high through 9, 10, and then starts to fall. By lunchtime, it's down by half. By dinner time, it's kind of getting to its lowest. And then it goes up again as you're sleeping. So you want to take that hormone first thing in the morning so you get your boost of energy. It's not a hormone, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's a supplement. You take it in the morning as you're needing a boost of energy, and then you take it right as you're going to bed so that your adrenal glands have something to work with overnight while you're sleeping. The next thing that can really help is another supplement called pregnenolone, and pregnenolone is one step after cholesterol. So, this is a funny thing because everybody's all into lowering cholesterol, but they don't realize you've got to have cholesterol to make these hormones in your body. If your body doesn't have enough cholesterol, then you have even less raw materials. So you can take people don't just eat cholesterol anymore. I mean, that's kind of not something we do anymore, healthy diet and all that. But you can take this pregnenolone, which is one step closer to hormones, and that acts like the steel parts that you're using to make that the factory is using to make the car rather than the nuts and bolts. But you need both in order to replenish the supply of what your adrenal glands need to make stress hormone.
Hmm.
When it comes to thyroid, you can help your thyroid out by taking mineral supplements. So there's a trace mineral supplement that has iodine, selenium, chromium, a couple of other ones that are helpful. And then, of course, zinc and magnesium and calcium. Your body need those anyway. But
Is that in a
just
supplement
those,
or is that?
yeah, those are so calcium and mag and zinc are kind of a twice daily higher dose, um, into the hundreds of milligrams, whereas the selenium and the iodine are micrograms. Like up the most you would want to take in iodine would be about 300 to 500 micrograms. That's a very small amount. And people whose thyroids are not healthy can actually take too much iodine and it'll really mess them up. So you have to be careful there, but not enough is also pretty common.
So, say if there's a patient that is experiencing all of the above, right? So they have issues with their
Mhm.
thyroid, and all of a sudden, they hear you on this podcast and they go, "Oh my God, I have these ridges on my nails that have been trying to figure out where they're from and I couldn't figure it out. And maybe I have subclinical hypothyroid and,
Yeah.
chronically stressed. I'm an OBGYN delivering babies.
Aren't we all?
Yeah.
All doctors are
Chronically stressed,
chronically
yeah.
stressed, but
So
OBGYNs, I think more than most.
so where would somebody go to, I mean, um, do you see patients or, where does somebody go to get help with all
Yes,
of these hormone support? I mean, I think adrenal fatigue,
sure.
what you mentioned, is definitely not spoken about very much at all. And I agree with you. I think
It's
it's
true.
absolutely true. And that happens in chronic stress. Gosh, who doesn't have chronic stress,
Yeah.
right? And you
Yeah.
deal with that on a daily basis. And so you have all these things going on with your hormones, and then you're going through menopause and perimenopause, and you're trying to figure out what the heck, is this part of my
Exactly.
thyroid or is this part of my, my stress hormones? Is it my estrogen? Is it my progesterone? So how do they figure all that out?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times it's all of the above, and you really do need a doctor who is well versed in this kind of thing, to help you figure it out. And if you find somebody who has an integrative medicine fellowship or who, I think NAM certification is a good start if you're menopausal and you're having, um, you know, you're noticing, your desire has fallen off, or you're just not as energetic as you used to be, or you're starting to have the menopausal symptoms, the hot flashes, the vaginal dryness, all that stuff. You can look on the NAMS website and find somebody who's NAMS certified for that particular part of it. But the thyroid information is a little less common, and you may have to really dig to find a doctor who knows how to do that kind of thing. Um, the Like I said, I mean, when I went looking and being a doctor myself, I went looking and I was told I was normal for a long, long time before I found somebody who could explain to me what was going on, and it was really by chance. But there are integrative psychiatrists if you're depressed, and you have not gotten relief from the normal stuff that psychiatrists do. Um, there are, integrative family medicine doctors, and then um, this new category of integrative endocrinologists. And actually, one of my associates that knows about this and is learning it is actually a rheumatologist. So it's not really a specialty across the board. There are lots of different physicians who just on their own have gotten interested, and you kind of just want to look, like, say if you looked at my website and it says, um, here are the kinds of conditions I treat, and it's chronic fatigue and thyroid and hormone imbalances. So if you find somebody who says that, and they are a physician, meaning they can prescribe pharmaceutical medications, then you're in the right spot.
Mm.
One thing that I have noticed lately is there are a lot of people on the internet who are saying, "Oh, I can fix you," and then if you dig in, you find out they're a chiropractor
Yeah,
or some other
for
kind
sure.
of non-physician credential where they can't prescribe medications, and they don't believe in prescribing pharmaceutical FDA approved medications, and it's just like, this is not the right person.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And some of them really charge ridiculous amounts of money too, making these big promises of, oh, I can get you to lose your weight and blah blah. Well, if your thyroid is messed up, it's not going to happen because you'll never have the energy to do it.
Right. 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 So tell me, where can the viewers find you? How can they get in touch with you? I mean, you know a lot
Okay,
and you can help them with their adrenals
sure,
and their
sure.
thyroid. So tell me, how can they reach out to you?
Sure. So right now, I am licensed in Texas, and my practice is in person and telemedicine. In Texas, you have to have an in person visit to establish a relationship
Sure.
before you can do telemedicine. But I am starting to work on getting licensed in other states. But my website is danagibbsmd.com, and I'm on the all the socials at danagibbsmd.com.
Mhm.
So that's my link tree is at danagibbsmd.com.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, I think that, it was so important to hear about this. And I think that we definitely, even as physicians, right, we definitely don't talk about subclinical hypothyroid and how it plays such a huge role in people's lives. And, you're going through life and you're experiencing all these symptoms and nobody can really help you because they just are not digging below the surface and really not finding out what's
Right.
going on. And then you think there's something wrong with you, then you're like, gosh, what's wrong with me? And nobody can figure out why I'm going through it, having all these
Exactly.
symptoms,
Yeah.
and then that, of course, your hypothyroid is going to affect how you feel and, make you feel depressed. And then when you think there's something wrong with you, that's going to even add more to your symptoms of being depressed and thinking there's
Yeah, because then you're stressed out worrying about what's wrong with you. Exactly.
yeah, and the
And
chronic stress. Yeah.
exactly. Well, I mean, in my case, the chronic stress started, really early,
Yeah.
and I was not aware that what I felt wasn't normal. I wasn't even aware
Yeah.
for years and years and years. I just thought, well, this is the way it is.
Yeah. See.
Um, so that's really, I don't know. When I think back to it, I'm really shocked
Yeah.
that that I went that long, because I mean, I went 20 years like that.
Yeah, that's crazy, and I'm so glad that
And
you're
then
out here now teaching others because this is so important. This is so, so important.
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, so that's another thing that I want to mention. So I just got finished. The fellow who's my mentor, who's Dr. Alan McDaniel, just got finished giving a 10-week seminar. So we met every Sunday for 10 weeks, and he gave a 10-week seminar, and he went through all of the endocrine systems. So that is available online, and then we're going to do the course live again in the fall.
that's
And I am the host and proctor of that, but he's the brains behind
yeah,
it.
that's fantastic. Well, thank you, and will that be on your website? So if people go on there, they can take a look and find it.
Yes,
Okay,
yes, it will
perfect.
absolutely be on there.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gibbs. This was fantastic. And I think it's so important for people to realize that first and foremost, there is hope and that there is
Absolutely.
a treatment and that it's not just all in their head, but that, clinically
No.
there is something wrong. And so when you are get the proper treatment, then you can feel better, and that there's ways around this. So this is fantastic, and also important to know about adrenal fatigue. I think I agree with you 100%. It's 100% real, and it happens, and it's important to know what the symptoms are, know what are possible treatments, and to go to a clinician that feels comfortable treating that and can give you
Right.
some support and some resources on how better to be assessed and also be treated. So thank you. I appreciate
Yes.
it. I appreciate
Yeah, you really have to be your own advocate as far as
Yes.
that goes, and keep digging and looking for um, somebody who knows these
Yeah.
integrative techniques.
Yeah. All right. Awesome.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gibbs. It was such a pleasure to have you on. And well, we are done here, and it's been real and really intimate. And remember, this is not meant to be any type of medical advice. So if you are having issues with your thyroid or chronic stress or fatigue, please go and see your healthcare provider so that they can better assess you and treat you. And until next time, this is the Muslim Sex Podcast. So, thank you for listening to the podcast, and make sure you leave us a review, share and like the podcast. And if you leave me a review, I'd love to shout you out on social media. So, be sure that you share it with all your friends. And thanks for listening.